I don't fly with quota hires. Get off my plane.
Are you formally refusing to fly with me because I'm black?
This airline chose diversity over safety.
Are you going to leave or ruin everyone's morning, honey? You wanted witnesses.
Good. Tell this girl to grab her bag. Ma'am, I got here as fast as I could.
My name is Dana Calloway Ashford. But we didn't do anything. Exactly, you watched it happen and did nothing.
The entire cabin.
You thought racism was the worst thing we would find. You were gambling with 300 lives.
I'm a captain.
Keep watching the story and follow Mr. Marcus Stories for more powerful moments.
Rain came down sideways over Terminal 4 at John F. Kennedy International Airport, streaking the floor to ceiling windows until the runway lights outside smeared into long orange ribbons. It was 6:52 in the morning. A cleaning cart squeaked somewhere behind the gate desk. A gate agent yawned into his coffee, and in the cockpit of a Boeing 787-9 bound for London Heathrow, Captain Walter Kincaid sat with his boots up on the rudder pedals, admiring his own reflection in the dark windscreen. Walter was 61 years old. He had flown for Ashford Air for 32 of those years, longer than most of the gate agents outside had been alive, and he wore that number like a medal pinned to his chest. The younger pilots called him the Iron Hawk, not to his face, but loud enough that it always found its way back to him. He liked the name. He believed he had earned it the way other men earn a mortgage, slowly, through decades of showing up and being right. Coffee, black, 2 sugars, and don't let it sit under the warmer this time, he said, without turning around, because he already knew Renee Palmer had stepped into the cockpit doorway behind him. Of course, Captain, Renee said, and disappeared back toward the galley the way she always did. Quickly, quietly, the way a person misses moves when they have learned that lingering costs something. Walter checked his watch. It was a heavy steel thing, a retirement gift from his first captain 20 years earlier, and he checked it constantly, less for the time and more for the weight of it on his wrist, a reminder that he had outlasted almost everyone. Departure was scheduled for 8:40. His first officer, according to the manifest taped to the yoke, was someone named D. Calloway. He did not recognize the name, and that alone soured his mood before he had even met her. Probably transferred in from some regional puddle jumper, he muttered to no one. Kids today. No discipline. Half of them can't hand-fly an approach without the computer doing it for them. The cockpit door clicked open behind him, carrying with it the smell of jet fuel and rain from the boarding bridge. Walter did not turn his chair. "You're cutting it close," he said. "I want the walk-around done in 5 minutes flat, and don't track water into my cockpit." "Good morning to you too, Captain," a voice answered. It was calm, it was even. It did not carry the nervous edge he expected from a new hire trying to make a first impression. Walter spun his chair around, already irritated at being answered back, and found a woman standing in the doorway he had never seen before in his life. She was tall, with posture so straight it made the standard-issue Ashford Air uniform look tailored, rather than off the rack. Her hair was pulled back into a low, severe knot. Her epaulets carried the 2 silver stripes of her first officer, and she held her flight bag the way a person holds something they have carried 10,000 times before, without thinking about it at all. She extended her hand. "First Officer Dana Calloway. I'll be flying right seat with you to Heathrow today." Walter looked at the hand for a long moment. He did not take it. "There's been a mix-up," he said. "No mix-up," Dana said, letting her hand drop without any visible reaction. "I was assigned to this flight last night. Crew scheduling made the change at 4:10 this morning. Your previous first officer called in sick." "I know who my first officer was supposed to be," Walter snapped. "Danny Ruiz. Danny knows how I run a cockpit." "I'm sure he does," Dana said, stepping past him to stow her bag in the compartment behind the jump seat. "But Danny is currently at an urgent care clinic in Rego Park with a fever of 102, and I'm the reserve pilot who got the call instead. So unless you'd like to explain to 311 passengers why their flight is delayed, I'd like to start the pre-flight check." And Walter stood up. He was a big man, 6'2", and he had spent 3 decades learning exactly how to use that size in a small space. He planted himself between the 2 pilot seats, one hand resting on the back of the first officer's chair, blocking it. "Nay, you're not hearing me," he said, his voice dropping into the low register he used when he wanted people to feel it in their chest. "Nay, I said there's a mix-up." Dana paused. The cockpit, small under the best of circumstances, seemed to shrink by half. "Nay, Captain Kincaid," she said, "is it? I've reviewed the flight plan. Fuel load is confirmed. Nay, I'm type-rated on this airframe, and I just transferred in from the Seattle base, where I logged 3 years and change flying this exact aircraft on trans-Pacific routes. And there is no mix-up," Walter laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound Seattle. "Nay, sure. They'll certify anybody out there these days. Listen to me, sweetheart. This is the transatlantic route. This is the big leagues. We deal with Jetstream shear. We deal with North Atlantic track routing. We deal with a Category 3 approach into Heathrow in weather that would make your regional puddle jumper turn around and go home. Nay, this isn't a hop to Cabo. I'm aware of the route," Dana said, and something in her jaw tightened, though her voice did not rise even a single degree. "Nay, I have 4,180 flight hours on this airframe specifically." "Logged hours," Walter scoffed, waving a hand as though swatting away a fly. "I know exactly how this works. I read the memos from corporate diversity targets, inclusion metrics. They want a pretty face in the right seat for the in-flight magazine photo, and I'm supposed to bet 300 lives on it. I don't fly with magazine covers. I fly with pilots. The air in the cockpit went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. 940 miles away, in a boardroom overlooking the Seattle skyline 8 months earlier, a will had been read that would eventually put Dana Calloway in this exact seat, though Walter Kincaid had no way of knowing that yet, and would not know it for another 41 minutes. Dana checked her watch, a plain steel thing with a scratched face, nothing like Walter's polished heirloom. "Captain, boarding starts in 15 minutes. I'm rested, I'm qualified, and I'm here to do a job. If you'll excuse me, I need to initialize the flight management computer." She stepped to move around him. Walter shoved the first officer's chair back with a screech of metal on track, blocking her path completely. "You are not touching my flight computer," he said. "I don't care what scheduling sent. I don't care what quota they're trying to hit this quarter. I am the captain of this aircraft. My word is law in this cockpit, and I am telling you, I do not feel safe flying with you." Dana looked up at him, and for the first time something flickered behind her eyes that was not patience. "You don't feel safe based on what exactly?" she asked. "Based on 32 years of knowing who has the right stuff and who doesn't," Walter said. "And looking at you, I'm looking at a liability. I'm not putting my name on a flight log next to yours. Get off my plane." Dana did not flinch. She did not raise her voice. She simply looked at him the way a person looks at a puzzle they have already solved. "Are you formally refusing to fly with me, Captain Kincaid?" she said. "I want to be very clear about this on the record." "I'm refusing," Walter said, crossing his arms over his chest like a man closing a store for the night. "Call scheduling. Tell them to send me a real pilot. I'll wait right here. This aircraft doesn't move an inch until you're off it." Dana held his stare for 3 full seconds. Then something crossed her face that was almost, but not quite, a smile. "Understood," she said quietly. "I'll make a call." She turned and walked out of the cockpit. Walter dropped into his seat, satisfied, already reaching for the intercom to summon a fresh cup of coffee to celebrate his small, ugly victory. He had no idea that the woman walking down the jet bridge was not calling crew scheduling. She was calling the one number in her phone that could end his career before the sun finished rising over the East River. Out in the gate area, passengers were beginning to gather, hauling roller bags and clutching paper cups of airport coffee. Dana found a quiet corner near a range-ricked window and pulled out her phone. She scrolled past the crew scheduling hotline entirely and pressed a name near the top of her favorites. Arthur Bell, chairman. It rang twice. "Dana," Arthur's voice came through, warm and a little rough with sleep still in it. "I thought you'd be over the Atlantic by now. Everything all right?" "We have a situation, Arthur," Dana said, her voice low. "I'm at JFK. I've been barred from the cockpit, barred. Arthur repeated, and the warmth drained out of his voice in an instant. By whom? Captain Walter Kincaid. He told me, verbatim, that he doesn't fly with quota hires and that this aircraft isn't moving until I'm off it. May. Silence stretched on the line for a moment. He doesn't know who you are. He thinks I'm a first officer who transferred in from Seattle, Dana said. May. Which is true. He just doesn't know the rest of it. I'll have security remove him right now, Arthur said, and she could hear a chair scrape somewhere in his kitchen. May. Not yet, Dana said. Arthur, you know why I've been flying the line for 6 months under my mother's maiden name. Dad built this airline over 40 years and told me before he passed that something had rotted underneath it, and he couldn't find where. I need to see how far this goes before I cut it out. Send Ben Foster down here. May. I want the regional director standing in that cabin as a witness when this finishes. Arthur exhaled slowly. I'll call him now. Dana Calloway was, in fact, Dana Calloway Ashford, the only child of Charles Ashford, who had founded Ashford Air out of a single-lease DC-9 in 1987 and built it into a carrier with 400 aircraft and 11,000 employees before a heart attack took him 8 months earlier at the age of 74. He had left Dana controlling interest in the company, along with a single handwritten note tucked inside his will that read only, "Find out what I couldn't." She had a commercial pilot's license before she had a driver's license, and she had spent the last 6 months flying under a scheduling alias, sitting in cockpits and crew lounges and layover hotels, listening. She hung up, smoothed the front of her uniform jacket, and walked back toward the gate desk, where a harried agent named Greg was trying to calm a growing line of confused passengers. First Officer Calloway, Greg said, spotting her. Captain Kincaid just radioed. He says you need to be reassigned. There's a misunderstanding, Greg, Dana said, pitching her voice just loud enough to carry to the front of the line. Captain Kincaid has refused to fly with me and is holding this aircraft on the ground until Ashford Air sends him a white pilot instead. The line went quiet. A woman near the front lowered her coffee cup. Somewhere behind her, a phone camera clicked on, its small red light blinking to life. I'm sure that's not exactly what he meant, Greg stammered. It's exactly what he said, Dana replied. And I'm not leaving. I'm the assigned first officer for this flight, and I'm going back on board. She turned and walked back down the jet bridge, not fleeing but advancing, giving Walter Kincaid precisely enough rope to finish the job himself. Back in the cockpit, Walter was midway through a story to Renee about the good old days, when a captain's word actually meant something, when the cockpit door opened and Dana stepped back inside. Walter's coffee cup froze halfway to his mouth. I thought I made myself clear, he said, setting the cup down hard enough to slosh liquid across the center console. I am the first officer of this flight, Dana said, and I am not leaving my post because you don't like the color of my skin. So we can either fly this aircraft, or you can explain to 311 people why their trip to London is cancelled. Walter's face went a deep, mottled red. He unclipped his harness and stood, and instead of sitting back down, he stormed past her out of the cockpit, snatching the cabin PA handset off its cradle near the forward galley on his way. Renee, he barked. Start boarding, Captain. We haven't finished the walk-around, Renee said. Start boarding, Walter shouted. I want witnesses. Passengers began filing on in a slow, confused river, dragging roller bags past a captain who stood squarely in the aisle of business class and a first who waited by the cockpit door with her hands folded on her back. Once the first 3 rows had settled into their seats, Walter raised the handset and his voice boomed through the cabin speakers with the practiced confidence of a man who had never once in 3 decades been told no and made it stick. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention for just a moment before we finish boarding, he began. I want you to understand exactly why we are delayed this morning. This airline has decided that meeting a diversity quota is more important than putting a qualified pilot in this cockpit, and I have refused to fly with an unqualified hire who was assigned to my flight deck this morning. A businessman in the second row lowered his newspaper. A mother in row 9 pulled her son a little closer. I have 32 years of experience, Walter continued. gesturing toward Dana with the handset still keyed. May, I know who belongs in that seat and who doesn't, so we are all going to sit here until this young lady decides to stop playing pilot and walk off my aircraft. May. He looked at Dana, expecting the cabin to turn against her, expecting a low murmur of agreement, the way it always had before, in smaller moments, with smaller audiences. Nay, are you going to leave, or are you going to ruin everyone's morning, honey? He said. Nay. Dana looked out at the rows of faces. She saw shock. She saw a few passengers already recording on their phones, the small red lights scattered through the cabin like fireflies. Nay. And she saw Renee standing frozen in the galley doorway, staring at her shoes, too afraid to say a word. Nay. I'm not leaving, Captain, Dana said, her voice carrying without needing the handset at all. Nay. And neither are you, because you just violated Federal Aviation Regulation 91.13 on careless operation, along with roughly 5 subsections of this company's anti-discrimination policy on a recorded cabin announcement in front of 311 witnesses. I don't care about policy, Walter said. I am the policy. 32 years. Who exactly are you? At that moment, a man in a rain-soaked suit burst through the jet bridge door, out of breath, his tie askew. It was Ben Foster, the regional director for the Northeast Hub. Captain Kincaid, Ben gasped. Hey, stand down now. Walter smirked, misreading the arrival entirely. Foster. Good, tell this girl to grab her bag so we can finally get moving. Ben looked past him, straight at Dana, and his face went the color of old paper. Ma'am, he said, his voice shaking slightly. I got here as fast as I could. Arthur called me himself. Ma'am, Walter repeated, frowning. Why are you calling the first officer, ma'am? Nay. Dana reached into the inner pocket of her uniform jacket and drew out a lanyard she almost never wore, a matte black card with a single embossed line of silver text. Nay. She held it up so the first few rows of business class could see it clearly. Nay. You asked who I am, Captain Kincaid, she said. My name is Dana Calloway Ashford. Nay. I am the majority owner and chief executive officer of Ashford Air. The color drained out of Walter Kincaid's face so fast that for a moment he looked like a man about to fall down. Nay, that's a lie, he said, though his voice had lost every ounce of its boom. Nay, Foster, tell her to knock it off. Who is she? Some auditor from corporate playing a prank? Nay. Ben Foster took a step backward, away from Walter, as though proximity to him were suddenly contagious. Nay, Captain, this is Dana Ashford. Her father founded this airline. She inherited controlling interest 8 months ago. Nay, she is your employer. She is my employer. She signs every paycheck on this aircraft. Nay, the reality of it landed on Walter like a dropped anvil. He staggered half a step and caught himself on a seat back, and the businessman sitting in that seat flinched away from him as though he might be contagious too. Nay, every phone in business class was raised now, recording. Miss Ashford, Walter said, sweat beading along his hairline, despite the cool cabin air. I didn't know. This was cockpit talk, breaking in the new hire. It's a tradition. A joke, Dana repeated, and her voice stayed perfectly level, which somehow made it worse. You violated federal law as a joke. You humiliated a colleague in front of 311 passengers as a joke. You grounded a $260 million aircraft for 41 minutes as a joke. I've been flying for 32 years, Walter said, his hands trembling now. My record is spotless. You can't fire me over one bad morning. I have seniority. I have a pension. Your record is spotless because people covered for you for 32 years, Dana said, her eyes flicking toward Renee in the galley. Because nobody dared to write you up. That era ended the day my father died. You simply never got the memo. She lifted the handset from where Walter had set it down and pressed the button. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dana Ashford speaking. I am a fully qualified 787 pilot, and yes, I am also the CEO of this airline. I owe every one of you a personal apology for what you just witnessed. It will not be tolerated at this company going forward. We're going to deplane briefly while I arrange a new flight crew, and every passenger on this aircraft will be compensated for the delay. I thank you for your patience this morning. A ragged burst of applause rolled through the cabin. Walter stood frozen in the aisle, a man who had spent 32 years believing the cockpit was his kingdom. now standing in the wreckage of it in real time. Hand over your credentials, Captain Kincaid, Dana said. Airport security is already on their way. Ben Foster gingerly took the badge, Walter unclipped with shaking fingers. Dana then turned toward the galley, where Renee and two younger flight attendants stood huddled together, watching the floor. Renee, Dana said. Is it? Yes, ma'am, Renee said, barely audible. We had no idea he'd say something like that. Renee. You didn't seem surprised when he blocked me from the seat, Dana said. You didn't seem surprised when he grabbed that handset. Renee. You just looked resigned. He can be difficult, Renee said. We try to keep the peace. Renee. Your job is passenger safety and enforcing company policy, Dana said. Not keeping the peace with a man breaking federal law in front of you. Renee. He's the captain, one of the younger attendants blurted. We have to listen to him. Not when the order is illegal, Dana said. There's a chain of command, yes. There's also a duty to act. You watched a colleague get humiliated because of her race, and every one of you chose silence, because it was easier than saying something. Effective immediately, this entire cabin crew is relieved of duty, pending a full ethics review. Renee's eyes went wide. We didn't do anything exactly, Dana said quietly. And at this airline, that isn't enough anymore. The walk from the gate to the main terminal felt, to Walter Kincaid, like the longest walk of his life. He was flanked by two Port Authority officers, not in handcuffs, but stripped of the epaulettes that had defined him for 3 decades. A visual demotion that every gate agent and janitor he passed seemed to clock instantly. The video from the cabin, all 3 angles of it, had already reached 1.8 million views on social media by the time he reached baggage claim, and the words Ashford CEO exposes racist pilot were trending in 6 different countries. At the gate desk, a short, red-faced man in a cheap suit came shoving through the crowd, trailing a subdued Walter behind him like a tugboat pulling wreckage. Where is the manager responsible for this? The man bellowed. He was Doug Kessler, regional representative for the pilots' union, a man who believed the captain's word was scripture and the union was its church. And Foster, Kessler shouted, ignoring Dana entirely. I just got a call from Captain Kincaid saying some HR girl pulled him off his own flight. This is a clear violation of the collective bargaining agreement, Section 14. If you're looking for the person responsible, Dana said, stepping forward, that would be me. Kessler turned, took in her uniform, and dismissed her instantly. Listen, sweetheart, I don't know what agenda you're pushing, but you don't fire a 32-year captain without cause. I fired him for gross misconduct and a federal violation, Dana said, and it's not his word against mine. She held up her phone and pressed play. Walter's voice, tinny but unmistakable, filled the air around the gate desk. This aircraft doesn't move an inch until you're off it. Kessler watched, and the color drained out of his face to match Walter's. Maybe he got a little heated, Kessler said, his volume dropping by half. We could talk suspension. Sensitivity training. Mr. Kessler, Dan said, you seem to think this is a negotiation. It isn't. I own this airline, and Captain Kincaid will never fly for it again. If the union wants to spend its dues defending a man caught on video calling a colleague a quota hire, that's your call to make. Kessler looked at Walter, weighed the size of the fight in front of him, and picked up his briefcase without another word. Come on, he muttered. We'll talk in the car. That night, sitting alone on a bench outside the secure zone, because his badge no longer let him back into the crew lounge, Walter called his wife of 26 years. Carol, I need a ride, he said. Something happened at work. I saw it, Carol said, her voice flat and cold. It's everywhere. It's not what it looks like, Walter said. It's exactly what it looks like, Richard, Carol said. Then catching herself, you know what I mean. The country club group chat has 41 messages in it. Don't come home tonight. I don't want news vans on my lawn. Carol, please. Check your bank app, Carol said. The company already froze the corporate card. The line went dead. Walter sat alone in the terminal, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, and felt something harden in his chest instead of soften. He was not a man built for shame. He was a man built for blame, and he began looking for somewhere to put it. The following week, in the glass-walled boardroom of Ashford Air's Manhattan headquarters, General Counsel Patricia Nolan slid a thick folder across the table toward Dana. He's suing, Patricia said. $50 million, filed yesterday by a lawyer named Sal Danning. Wrongful termination, defamation, claims you entrapped him by hiding your identity. He's also threatening to go to the press with maintenance records if we don't settle quietly, Ben Foster added from the far end of the table. He's been here 32 years. He knows where the corners were cut. That's not a lawsuit, Patricia said. That's blackmail with a filing fee attached. We don't settle, Dana said. A trial will keep this in the news for a year, Patricia warned. If he leaks anything about maintenance deferrals, even something minor, our stock takes a hit we might not recover from for a decade. $5 million and an NDA is cheaper than the alternative. If we pay him, we tell every bigot in this company that screaming loud enough works, Dana said. I won't do it. I want a full audit of his flight logs for the last 10 years. Cross-reference his hours against fuel purchase orders, credit card statements, and hotel check-ins. What are we looking for? Patricia asked. We're looking for the reason he thought he was untouchable, Dana said. Men like him don't just break the social rules. They break the professional ones, too. Find it. It took Patricia's team 3 days. When they reconvened, the mood in the room had shifted from grim to something closer to a held breath before a dive. Over the last 5 years, Patricia said, sliding a new file across the table, Captain Kincaid has been over-ordering fuel on his transatlantic legs by an average of 11%, then selling the surplus fuel credits to a ground vendor at Newark named Curtis Ryland for cash, off the books. To hide the weight discrepancy on the load sheets, he's been falsifying the zero fuel weight figures fed into the flight management computer. How much money? Dana asked. Just over $1.9 million across 5 years, Patricia said. But that's not the part that should scare you. If he'd had an engine failure on a heavy takeoff with falsified weight data, the aircraft's performance margins would have been wrong by enough to matter. He was gambling with 300 lives every single flight to make himself an extra few $1,000s a trip. Dana closed the folder and sat with that for a long moment, the fear she had been carrying since the lawsuit landed, replaced by something colder and steadier. 3 other pilots came forward that same week, once word spread quietly through the company that Ashford Air was finally listening. A first officer named Priya. 3 specific former colleagues surfaced through Patricia's investigation, each with a story that had gone unreported for years. A retired flight attendant named Carol Jenkins described being screamed at by Walter on a diverted flight in 2019 until she filed an incident report that mysteriously vanished from human resources. A former first officer named Miguel Ortiz described being passed over for a captain upgrade after Walter told a training board that Miguel, in his words, didn't have the right temperament, a phrase Ortiz later learned Walter used almost exclusively about pilots of color. And a young ramp supervisor named Kelly Vance described an incident where Walter had refused to let her sign off on his aircraft's paperwork, insisting a male supervisor redo the same inspection line by line for no reason he was ever able to articulate. Call the FBI, Dana said, once the fuel scheme was confirmed. Tell them to meet us at Danning's office. And call the car. At the law offices of Danning and Associates, Walter sat with his feet up on the conference table. Wearing a new suit he could not really afford, feeling more confident than he had any right to feel. Corporations hated bad press, he told himself. They would pay to make this go away, the way they always had. They're late, Sal Danning said, checking his watch. That's a good sign. Means they're scrambling. They should be scrambling, Walter said. I know which of their planes have had sticky landing gear indicators written up 3 times and never fixed properly. The door opened. Instead of a courier with a settlement check, Dana Ashford walked in wearing a sharp charcoal suit, followed by Patricia Nolan, and behind her, 4 agents in windbreakers, stenciled FBI across the back in bold yellow letters. What is this? Danning demanded, standing so fast his chair tipped backward. This is a settlement meeting. You can't bring federal agents into a settlement meeting. This isn't a settlement meeting anymore, Dana said, sliding the fuel scheme folder across the table. until it stopped directly in front of Walter. May, this is the end of one. Walter looked down at the folder, at the logo of Curtis Ryland's fuel company stamped across the cover page, and his face went the color of wet concrete. May, I can explain, he stammered. It was standard practice. Everybody did it, Dana said. Only you. Agent Marissa Cole stepped forward, handcuffs already loose in her hand. Walter Kincaid, you're under arrest for wire fraud, grand larceny, and endangering the safety of an aircraft, in violation of federal law. May, please stand and place your hands behind your back. Danning looked at the folder, then at his client, and stepped back like a man pulling his hand off a hot stove. May, I'm withdrawing as counsel, he said flatly. I don't represent felons, Marcus, Walter shouted as the agents took hold of his arms. You can't do this. I have rights. I'm a captain. You're a criminal, Dana said, meeting his eyes as they walked him past her. And you're going to prison. Walter's legs seemed to lose their strength somewhere around the doorway, and the sound he made was not the boom of a man who had run a cockpit like a kingdom for 32 years. It was smaller than that. Dana watched him go, and did not feel triumphant, exactly. She felt something closer to relief, the specific relief of a rotten board finally being pried loose from a floor. The trial, 6 months later, was mercifully short. Against fuel receipts, falsified weight logs, and testimony from 3 colleagues who had waited years to be believed, Walter Kincaid had almost nothing left to argue with. He was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison for wire fraud and endangering an aircraft, and he lost his pilot's license, his pension, and his marriage within the same 8-week span. Carol filed for divorce before sentencing was even finished, sold the house in Rye, New York, and moved to Florida without leaving a forwarding address. At Ashford Air, the name Walter Kincaid stopped being spoken with reverence and started being spoken as a warning, the kind scientist used when training new hires on what not to become. The company rolled out what employees quietly started calling the Kincaid Rule, a policy guaranteeing that any crew member, regardless of rank, could report unsafe or discriminatory conduct without fear of retaliation, with a direct line to the ethics board that bypassed local management entirely. Renee Palmer, the flight attendant who had once stared at her shoes rather than speak up, was reinstated after completing a company-mandated training program, and 18 months later was promoted to lead the very assertiveness curriculum she had once needed herself. On a clear October morning, sunlight instead of rain sliding off the wings this time, Dana Ashford sat in the left seat of a Boeing 77, preparing for a new inaugural route to Tokyo, with Renee standing at the forward door doing the final head count. Ready for pushback, Captain Ashford, Renee said, and there was nothing nervous in it at all. Dana looked out at the tarmac, at the wet spot that had long since dried, where a rainstorm had once tried to ground her, and released the parking brake. Ready, she said. Let's fly. She had learned in the months since that morning at Terminal 4 that real power was never about who could shout the loudest in a room. It was about who was willing to stay quiet, keep working, and let the truth do the shouting instead. She was not just the owner of the company her father built. She had become its captain, in every sense of the word, and the sky ahead of her had never looked wider. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction created for entertainment and educational purposes only. All characters, names, businesses, and events depicted are entirely fictional and do not represent any real person, living or dead, or any actual establishment. Any resemblance to real persons, organizations, or events is purely coincidental. This content is intended to explore themes of human dignity, workplace ethics, and social justice through narrative storytelling. It does not make factual claims about any individual, company, or institution.